Chapter 20. This chapter is a meal. And by this point, I was starting to see what Scott is actually doing in this novel. Finally, we are up to, for this volume, we're up to page 140, chapter 20, and finally his method is coming clear. The pieces all started fitting together for me now. I see why he has included what he has included. But it was still just forming right now. They eat in the tower, which has some massive long table, a very, very, very long table, and all the Highlanders sit along this one table that goes for, it's hard to know how far, but it looks like they've got about 300 men at this one table. Fergus sits at the very end as the head, and people are positioned along this table according to rank. So the highest ranking people are sitting next to him, and right down the bottom are the lower ranks. There's a fair bit of description about this table. Edward is placed right at the top with Fergus and a couple of tribal elders, and right down at the far end where Edward can hardly see them, and the officers of the chief's household according to their order, and lowest of all, the tenants who actually cultivated the ground. Even beyond this long perspective, Edward might see upon the green, to which a huge pair of folding doors opened, a multitude of Highlanders of a yet inferior description, who nonetheless were considered as guests and had their share both of the countenance of the entertainer and of the cheer of the day. In the distance, fluctuating around this extreme verge of the banquet, was a changeful group of women, ragged boys and girls, beggars young and old, large greyhounds and terriers. So we've got the whole spectrum here. Now, Scott goes on to tell us about the food. There's the same variation with the food. The people at the high class end of the table get the best food. As it goes further down the table, they get served rougher stuff, less tasty stuff. But everybody is fed, and Fergus feels that this is his responsibility. They don't have to pay for their food. If they are his men, if they are becoming his clan, effectively, he will feed them. And this is how he is purchasing their loyalty, which for most of them is real loyalty, because the Highlands has nothing now, especially after all the wars. People just starved to death. A lot of clans were completely disrupted. Feed a Highlander for a year and he is probably going to be loyal to you for the rest of his life. There's a bit of conversation at this meal. Somebody sings a song in Gaelic, and Edward feels that somewhere in this song there's a reference to himself, because at one point a lot of people turn and look at him. The song is very popular. Fergus liked it. And there is a point here that I think is sort of more relevant than it looks. When the song ceased, there was a deep pause while the aroused feelings of the poet and the hearers gradually subsided into their usual channel. The chieftain, who during this scene had appeared rather to watch the emotions which were excited than to partake their high tone of enthusiasm, filled with claret a small silver cup which stood by him. "Give this," he said to an attendant, "to MacMurrough Nunfon." That's the man who sang the song. "And when he has drank the juice, bid him keep for the sake of Vityan Vor the shell of the gourd which contained it." Anyway, the man was given the gift, he drank, and kissing the cup, shrouded it with reverence in the plaid which was folded on his bosom. This is a very popular thing that he's done. Then there's a range of toasts, everybody's drinking a lot, but not Fergus, although Fergus is drinking a little bit. He's kind of just watching everybody and supervising. At the end of the meal, Fergus is noticing that Edward isn't drinking. I do rather wonder if he was hoping to get Edward drunk, but Edward has been rather cautious. He's had a few drinks, but he has stopped. And Fergus has noticed, so there's no point keeping him at the table. He's not going to get him drunk here. This is my reading. Scott doesn't actually tell us, but then he never does. He leaves it to the reader to infer these things, and it seems pretty clear to me that that's what's happening. So then he says, "Okay, let's leave the table. Why don't we go and have tea with my sister?" And chapter 20 finishes with them leaving the dinner table and heading off to meet Fergus's sister. Chapter 21. Flora has her own wing. She has a drawing room, and that's where they meet her. It says it was furnished in the plainest and most simple manner. For at Glenaquoich Every other sort of expenditure was retrenched as much as possible for the purpose of maintaining in its full dignity the hospitality of the chieftain and retaining and multiplying the number of his dependents and adherents. So they're living on nothing so that he can keep feeding these people and keep building up his army that's building up here. But there was no appearance of this parsimony in the dress of the lady herself. She is dressed elegantly. She's dressed in Paris fashions. She has ringlets, which were very popular in this entire 50-year period. And she looks very much like her brother. It's very obvious that they're brother and sister. Like Fergus, Flora has black eyes and black hair, pale skin. Early education had impressed upon her mind, as well as on that of the chieftain, the most devoted attachment to the exiled family of Stuart. She believed it the duty of her brother, of his clan, of every man in Britain, at whatever personal hazard, to contribute to that restoration which the partisans of the Chevalier de St. George had not ceased to hope for. So with Flora, it's a more pure desire to have him back on the throne because she's a loyal subject, which is kind of, like in those days, that's what women did. That's the correct way for a woman to think. Whereas Fergus, he wants that too, but he also thinks he'll become an earl. So he's got an element of self-interest. Flora doesn't. So she's slightly more fanatic in her devotion, and she's more pure. That's what Scott says. Fergus, upon the death of his parents, had been for some time a page of honour in the train of the Chevalier's lady. That is, the old pretender's wife. And the old pretender's wife, out of kindness to Fergus, paid for Flora to attend the convent where she was raised. Scott just goes through a general, Flora's very accomplished, very beautiful, she has elegant manners. But for all that, there's a touch of the very real about her. She's a genuine person. She knows French and English and Italian, but here in the Highlands she's got no opportunity of following those interests, so she's learned Gaelic and she's developed an interest in Gaelic songs and poems. She has a small pension given her by the old pretender's wife, and she uses that to aid the people who live at Glenaquoich. And basically they're running it as if they are a prince and princess themselves and everybody there are their subjects. It's very clear that that's what they're doing. But for this reason, all of them love her. She's very popular in Glenaquoich. Probably Glenaquoich, I don't know. From situation as well as choice, Miss McKeever's society was extremely limited. Her most intimate friend had been Rose Bradwardine, to whom she was much attached. Scott goes on about how artistic they look together because Flora is so black-haired and Rose is so blonde, and they're like, Rose is so calm in her spirits and Flora is so volatile. Rose has led a very sheltered life, whereas Flora has seen a great deal of the world. So Scott spent some time on this. At this point my camera battery went flat and I just left it there because I was at the end of the chapter, but I realise now that looks a little bit abrupt. This entire chapter really was telling us about Flora. So I'll conclude with the final sentence of the chapter. To this young lady, now presiding at the female empire of the tea table, Fergus introduced Captain Waverley, whom she revived with the usual forms of politeness. This entire chapter was Fergus and Waverley walking into Flora's rooms. And now we have arrived. Chapter 22. This chapter is another important one for the book, and in this chapter it all became very clear to me. Scott's methods that was starting to make sense to me in the last chapter, this is a chapter where they really have gelled. So this is all about Flora. Fergus leaves Edward with Flora because he has to go back to the table and finish the meal with everybody. Edward had asked what the words of the song were that he thought he might have been mentioned in, and Fergus has asked Flora to explain it to him. Flora wasn't present at the time, so she has two handmaidens there whose names are Una and Kathleen, and she sends Una to find out what the words were, and when she does, she says effectively it's a difficult translation and she needs a little bit of time to express it in the right way. And she says the meal's coming to an end, this is probably not the best place to do it. So she sends Edward off with Una, and she's going to follow with Kathleen. Now, she actually goes a completely different way. So by this, I think there is more going on here. Anyway, Edward doesn't know where he's going, but he follows Una, and they leave this tower place and they follow a path away from the tower, outside. And they go across the nearby grounds. It's all very open and rocky and treeless and everything here. Like, it's typical sort of highland ground. They walk for a bit and come to a river. Scott calls it two brooks. So there's a wide river and there's a narrow river. And I'm going to talk about them even though it seems completely ridiculous. Because the wide river is passing through the open country. You can see it a mile off in the distance. It is sort of full of water, flowing smoothly, but flowing slowly and gently. And joining it from up a hill on the side, there is a much faster stream, or a brook he calls it. A spot about 1/4 of a mile from the castle, with two brooks which formed the little river, had their junction. The larger of the two came down the long bare valley, which extended apparently without any change or elevation of character as far as the hills which formed the boundary permitted the eye to reach. But the other stream, which had its source among the mountains on the left side of the strath, seemed to issue from a very narrow and dark opening between two large rocks. These streams were different also in character. The larger was placid and even sullen in its course, wheeling in deep eddies or sleeping in dark blue pools. But the motions of the lesser brook were rapid and furious, issuing from between precipices like a maniac from his confinement, all foam and uproar. It was up the course of this last stream that Waverley, like a knight of romance, was conducted by the fair Highland damsel, his silent guide. That was the paragraph that made it all clear to me, the way Scott is using imagery in this, because this business of the two streams is quite clearly metaphoric. At this point, I wasn't 100% sure what the metaphor was. Are we looking at the big, slow river being Hanoverian? Are we looking at the big, slow river being the course of conformity? I'm still not 100% sure, but I recognise the metaphor when I see it. I might not know what it means, but that's clearly what it is. So that was when I started to view a lot of these characters and events a bit differently and see just how he was putting them together. Anyway, Una takes Edward up a path that runs beside this fast-flowing river, and they go uphill. And they come to some big rocks, which looks like it's the end of the path, but when you get there, you realise the path actually goes around a bit further, which is the sort of thing we've seen before, and I now see that that's another metaphor too. He's sort of going in paths that you can't find on your own. You have to be led here. He's starting to enter into the secret ways more. And then there's a bit. Around the castle all was cold, bare and desolate, yet tame even in desolation. But this narrow glen, at so short a distance, seemed to open into the land of romance. The rocks assumed 1,000 peculiar and varied forms. In one place, a crag of huge size presented its gigantic bulk as if to forbid the passengers' further progress. In another spot, the projecting rocks from the opposite side of the chasm had approached so near to each other that 2 pine trees laid across, and covered with turf formed a rustic bridge at the height of at least 150 feet. It had no ledges and was scarcely 3 feet in breadth. While gazing at this pass of peril which crossed like a single black line the small portion of blue sky not intercepted by the projecting rocks on either side, like he's in a chasm looking up and he can see this bridge above him and there's like blue sky over it, so it's just this narrow thing. It was with the sensation of horror that Waverley beheld Flora and her attendant appear. like inhabitants of another region, propped as it were in mid-air upon this trembling structure. As she stopped upon observing him below, and with an air of graceful ease which made him shudder, waved her handkerchief to him by way of signal. He was unable, from the sense of dizziness which her situation conveyed, to return the salute, and was never more relieved than when the fair apparition passed on from the precarious eminence which she seemed to occupy with so much indifference, and disappeared on the other side. So now that I see what he's doing, I'm just seeing it all as metaphor. Like, here she is up there in the dizzy heights where everything is danger, and she's perfectly comfortable there. He is looking up at her from below. She's somewhere that he doesn't dare to go, and I can see now that this is his metaphor as well, that if Edward chooses to follow Flora, it's into places where he has so far been too afraid to go, and it's a very perilous path. Anyway, Una leads him further up this path. Still higher rose eminences and peaks, some bare, some clothed with wood, some round and purple with heath, and others splintered into rocks and crags. At a short turning, the path, which had for some furlongs lost sight of the brook, suddenly placed Waverley in front of a romantic waterfall. It was not so remarkable either for great height or quantity of water as for the beautiful accompaniments which made the spot interesting. After a broken cataract of about 20 feet, the stream was received into a large natural basin filled to the brim with water, which, when the bubbles of the fall subsided, were so exquisitely clear that he could see the bottom. Eddying round this reservoir, the brook found its way over a broken part of the ledge and formed a second fall. Then, wheeling out beneath from among the smooth dark rocks, it went down into the glen. The borders of this romantic reservoir corresponded in beauty, but it was beauty of a stern and commanding cast. Mossy banks of turf. Here Waverley found Flora gazing on the waterfall. 2 paces further back stood Kathleen holding a small Scottish harp. The sun, now stooping in the west, gave a rich and varied tinge to all the objects which surrounded Waverley, and seemed to add more than human brilliance to the full expressive darkness of Flora's eye, exalted the richness and purity of her complexion, and enhanced the dignity and grace of her beautiful form. And at this moment Edward tumbles passionately in love with her, or falls into a crush on her. She's here in this most romantic of settings, and it all adds to her appeal. Flora realises the effect she's having on him, but she doesn't realise the extent to which it's happening. She's used to this from people. She leads him to somewhere and she says, "I have given you the trouble of walking to this spot because I thought the scenery would interest you, and because a Highland song needs its own wild and appropriate accompaniments." In other words, she understands the power of settings. So she's brought him here because she knows the scenery is going to add to the power of her song, and she knows she looks truly at advantage here. And then she sings the song. And it's a battle song. It is the one that the bard sang in the hall, but she puts it to different music, so it sort of sounds like a very different song. She's halfway through it when a greyhound wanders up and interrupts them, and she says, that's Fergus's greyhound. He'll be here in a minute and he won't want to hear me sing. So she skips to the end and sings the last 3 verses, which is all a call to battle. Awake on your hills, on your islands awake, brave sons of the mountain, the frith and the lake. 'Tis the bugle, but not for the chase is the call. 'Tis the pibroch's shrill summons, but not to the hall. 'Tis the summons of heroes for conquest or death, etc., etc. You get the idea. This is a call to arms, really, this song, and this is very specifically a call to Edward. This chapter actually ends on the closing lines of that verse. And at this point, there's a lot I want to talk about, and I don't think my battery's going to last very long. At this point, having realised what he's doing, I understood why he has the women, because he's got different portions of society, and that's metaphoric as well. Edward's attraction to the various women in this book. The women are representing the various paths he might take, the various political affiliations he might have, and the various life philosophies he might embrace. I can see now even Cecilia Stubbs, who would have been inferior to him and had nothing to offer, but she was English and she was safe, and that wasn't going to work for him at all. She wasn't equal to him. But that is a path he could have taken. He could have settled into mediocrity. So that is one path, and it's not about her herself. And then we have Rose. And Rose, I can see now, although her father is Jacobite, he's not breaking the law in any way. He's not following the Jacobite way. He is moderate. He is obeying his country and following the rules. That is the path that Edward could take. For Bradwardine, it's almost more of like a nostalgia for what was, and he did serve in the 1715 uprising, but he wasn't terribly effectual. He made his protest, and since then he's just been living very quietly at Bradwardine. That's Rose's position. Rose is a Hanoverian in effect. Rose is not a fighter. Rose does live in a tower, and she's more about defence and security than anything else. And then we had Alice, and Alice represents the purely illegal path. Alice represents the underworld of this society. Her father is a bandit, and that's a path that Edward could take too. He could step outside society altogether and follow that path, but Edward actually had no interest in Alice at all. She was a strapping wench, and he just didn't give her a moment's thought. Even when she kissed him, even when she flirted with him, he paid her no attention. And this is where we see that Evan wants to marry her, which kind of shows where Evan fits into it, because Evan, as a Highlander, he doesn't notice Rose. His path, he feels that the warrior path of Fergus would suit him, to actually be a soldier on the side of the old Pretender. But if he can't do that, his alternate path is to be a bandit. He would not want to live at Bradwardine and succumb to British rule at all. So now we've met the fourth person, who is Flora, and Flora is all about revolution. Flora is the warrior princess in the most acceptable way you can have a warrior princess. She's a siren. She is absolutely calling. Her song is a call to war. She's got all the trappings of all the romance Edward could ever want. But she's actually also deadly serious, and she's very perilous, which was shown by the way she was up there on that bridge up in the heights and not even really noticing it. So that's why Scott gave us all that detail that just didn't seem to fit. It was so lengthy, it took so long to explain, but that's what it was all about. It was showing us what we've got here are the different paths that he could take, the different allegiances that he could form. He's a young man, and this is his point of choosing his life. So in this way, I think I did read something somewhere that this was a Bildungsroman, and you can see it here. Finally, you can see that whatever choice he makes is going to impact his future hugely. Because at this point, he is still a Hanoverian soldier, but not actually by choice. I kind of did notice that a long time ago. I didn't say anything, but there was that chapter that was titled Choice of a Career. It was never his choice. He was imagining exciting things, and his father sent him a letter and said, "You're in the military." So he never actually chose his path. He just blindly followed along the path that was before him without any thought. And here he has options. And I think in the river and the brook, we're also seeing that so far he has been following the wide placid river. His emotions have been fairly calm, fairly surface. He hasn't really been connected with himself even. And now Flora is bringing that out. He's followed the path of a passionate, tumultuous brook. And this, I expect, is going to bring him into contact with that part of himself that is buried deep inside, that is passionate and tumultuous. all of that makes it more interesting, because I was starting to wonder where he was going. Like, why did they even go to see Donald the Bandit? It didn't seem to fit in anywhere, but I do see now it's because of the sides of society that we're being shown. Edward is drifting from one to the other, and through the women we're seeing what is attracting him and what isn't. Because of this, I think we're supposed to compare Rose's song and Flora's song, because they both did the same thing. Edward's introduction to each has been basically the same. He met Rose, he was taken to her apartments, she sang a song. And now he has met Flora, he's been taken to her apartments, and she has sang a song. And I don't think that's coincidence. That's why they went to Rose's apartments. I thought it seemed odd, but I see now that this was Scott's plan. My battery's going flat, so I'll charge the camera and then I'll talk about the songs after that. It's very hot. I went for a walk. I don't know if that was a good idea. And I'm back inside, but it's not exactly cool in here either. So the songs. Rose's song was about St. Swithin's chair, and it was about ghosts. But more specifically, it was about... The Baron had gone away to fight and had been away for 3 years, and the lady, his wife, was left behind and running everything while he was gone. But he was gone for years, and when he came back she was dead. And that was Rose's song. While Flora's is all about fighting and fighting to the death, and how we can't just keep living the way we are, we've got to take action. And action might mean winning, or action might mean dying in battle, but they're actually the only choices we have, because we can't endure to keep going the way we are. And I think that pretty much sums up their role in the story. I mean, that's what Rose is doing that now. She's sitting back at Bradwardine Manor waiting, and she's waiting for Edward. So there is kind of a message in that if he doesn't realise she's there waiting, he could leave it too long. She might not be there when he gets back. But it's very clear in this that Rose's song is about the lady not going off to war. The lady is at home. It's defence. It's a defence song, just like everything about Rose is defence. Her tower where she has her rooms and the stories she remembers from her childhood, they're all about defence. Whereas Flora's stories are all about attacks, taking a much more active part. So Rose is very passive, Flora is very active. And yes, I do think that's intentional on Scott's part. I think that at some level that does translate into the greater themes of Hanoverian versus Jacobite. I think the Hanoverians are doing that. They are in a sort of defensive position, a safe defensive position, because they've already done their fighting. That's my reading of it, is that if Edward waits too long, he might actually lose his place in Hanoverian society. And that is something else that I thought before. Scott is kind of saying that when you have to pick your allegiance like this, and allegiance is very much like a marriage too. So you are kind of married to your country in a way, married to your king. And at this point in the story, Edward is kind of being wooed by each side. He's being courted by the Hanoverians and by the Jacobites. And so far, he's going with the exciting one, which is not necessarily the wrong choice. At this point, we don't know. We're just being presented with both sides. They've both got a lot going for them. Really, the Jacobite side is presented as being very honourable and chivalrous, caring for each other in a way that the Hanoverians don't seem to. The only caring that we've seen coming from the Hanoverian side is this helping Richard into a higher position in Parliament and giving Edward his commission, which is a big thing, but it's not an exciting thing. And it's not something that he's done of his own volition. He has not chosen that side. So that's what I'm seeing, and that fits with what I was saying before about the role of the women. The women are representing the different political positions. And Scott really wants that marriage concept to come through. So hopefully I can pull some kind of argument together from that. But that's it. That's why Rose, even though she's described as being quite timid and retiring, I did think it was seriously out of character for her to be able to sing a song in front of Edward. But I see now that this is why Scott did it. I think that's a bit clumsy of him, but it's his first novel. People are always clumsy in their first novels. And so I can see the theme of this book as being Edward's choice between Hanoverian and Jacobite. That's been clear from the start with his uncle and his father. And I know there's a lot of people who have discussed this work in terms of new versus old, of nostalgia versus innovation. And I think, there is something there, definitely. The Jacobites are sort of the old way and the Hanoverians are the new way. But I'm not convinced that that's exactly what it is, old versus new. I think it's more change versus tradition. I think that's more what it is. And I think, not saying that either is wrong, but at any era, at any time in society, that is a constant battle that's going on, whether to change something or leave it the same. And you never know in the moment which is going to be the better path. Anyway, that finishes that chapter.